My husband ordered me to hide at the back of the gala because he was ashamed of me. Then the billionaire CEO walked past him, took my hands, and whispered, "I've searched for you for 30 years, but that wasn't the secret that destroyed my marriage." My husband brought me to the gala because he wanted to impress the company's new owner. Before we entered the ballroom, he leaned close and whispered, "Stay in the back. That dress is embarrassing." 20 minutes later, the new owner arrived. He was a billionaire whose name had filled the Denver business pages for weeks. My husband hurried toward him with an outstretched hand and the desperate smile he reserved for powerful men, but the billionaire barely looked at him. Instead, he stared across the room at me. His face went pale. Then he walked straight past my husband, took both of my hands, and said, with tears in his eyes, "I've been searching for you for 30 years." The room went silent. "I never stopped loving you." Behind him, my husband dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor like a gunshot. That was the night my 25-year marriage began to collapse. But the gala did not destroy it. The gala simply turned on the lights. Welcome to When Family Breaks One. I'm telling you this because I once confused control with protection, silence with peace, and survival with marriage. Stay until the end, because the man who found me that night was not the only person hiding a 30-year secret. Please subscribe to When Family Breaks One. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about broken families, buried truths, and the moment someone finally chooses freedom. 3 days earlier, Fletcher announced that I would attend the gala with him. He said it over breakfast without looking up from the Wall Street Journal. "You're coming Saturday night. In 25 years, Fletcher had rarely wanted me beside him at business events. I was the wife who stayed home, pressed his shirts, and made sure dinner was waiting. My work was everywhere in his life. My presence was not. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear," I said. "The company has been acquired," he replied. "The new CEO will be there. Find something cheap. Just don't embarrass me. Don't embarrass me." Those words had followed me through our marriage. Don't talk too much. Don't mention your family. Don't laugh loudly. Don't disagree in public. Don't take up space. For years, I believed Fletcher was teaching me how to behave. Looking back, I realize he was teaching me how to disappear. Control does not always begin with a locked door. Sometimes it begins with a correction soft enough to sound reasonable. Eventually, you stop asking what you think and start asking what will keep the peace. Fletcher gave me $200 a month for personal expenses. I once called it generosity because he paid the mortgage. Now I understand that financial dependence can be a beautiful room without windows. I spent 2 days searching thrift stores. At the fourth shop, I found a navy blue dress with long sleeves and a simple neckline. It cost $45. In the dressing room mirror, I saw a woman I had almost forgotten. She looked dignified. She looked like someone who belonged in the center of her own life. The saleswoman smiled. "You found something special." For one brief moment, I believed her. Then Fletcher saw the dress. "That's what you're wearing?" I thought it looked elegant. "It looks old, but it will have to do. Stay close enough that people know I'm married, but don't insert yourself into conversations." I nodded, because nodding had become easier than defending myself. During the drive downtown, I touched the silver locket beneath my dress. Inside was a fading photograph of 2 college students beside a lake. One was me, the other was Julian Blackwood. The Grand Hyatt ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. The moment we entered, I felt every dollar of my $45 dress. Fletcher pointed to a place near the bar, partly hidden behind decorative palms. "Wait there. Don't wander off." From the shadows, I watched him move from group to group. He laughed too loudly and leaned into conversations that kept closing around him. Fletcher had always wanted to be the most powerful man in the room. That night, he looked like a man begging the room not to notice how little power he had left. Then the energy changed. Conversations softened. Heads turned toward the entrance. A tall man entered with several executives. His dark hair was silver at the temples. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need to prove he belonged there. Someone near me whispered, "That's Julian Blackwood." My fingers tightened around my glass. 30 years disappeared. The powerful man at the entrance became the student who had once bought me apple pie because I could not afford dinner. Julian. Then he tilted his head while listening to a board member, and my body recognized him before my mind accepted the truth. I stepped farther behind the palms. My first instinct was to hide. That should tell you how deeply Fletcher had changed me. The man I had once loved was 30 yards away, and I believed the safest thing I could do was become invisible. Across the room, Fletcher rushed toward him. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "Fletcher Morrison. I've been looking forward to discussing several opportunities with you." Julian accepted the handshake politely, but his eyes moved beyond Fletcher, until they found mine. The color drained from his face. Recognition, disbelief, and pain moved across his features. Then he walked toward me with the careful certainty of a man afraid that if he moved too fast, I might disappear again. He stopped in front of me. Up close, I could see the years in his face, but his eyes were the same. Dark, honest, searching. "Maureen," he whispered. No one had said my name that way in 30 years. "Julian." He reached for my hands. The moment his skin touched mine, everything I had buried returned. The proposal beside the lake, the emerald ring, the child he never knew existed, and the goodbye he never understood. "I've been searching for you for 30 years, he said. "I never stopped loving you." The champagne glass shattered behind him. Fletcher stepped toward us, his face burning with humiliation. "This is absurd. Maureen, what is going on? How could I explain 30 years in one sentence?" Julian looked at Fletcher. "I need to speak with your wife privately. My wife is not going anywhere with you." Fletcher grabbed my upper arm hard enough to hurt. Julian's expression changed. "Take your hand off her." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Fletcher released me. Julian handed me a white business card embossed with silver. "My personal number is on the back. Please call me. There are things you deserve to know." Fletcher seized my wrist. "We're leaving." I gave Julian the smallest shake of my head. Not because I wanted to protect Fletcher, but because I still did not know how to protect myself. "I'll wait for your call," Julian said. Fletcher dragged me through the ballroom as whispers rose behind us. I held Julian's card in my fist until the edges pressed into my palm. In the car, Fletcher shouted that I had humiliated him and destroyed his chance to save his business. But I barely heard him. My mind had already gone back 30 years, to Colorado State University, to an emerald ring, to a secret pregnancy, and to the day I broke the heart of the only man I had ever truly loved. Fletcher wanted to know why Julian Blackwood had spent 30 years searching for me. The answer began when I was 22 years old, engaged, carrying Julian's child, and sitting across from a man powerful enough to destroy both our futures. The answer began long before the gala, when Julian and I were still young enough to believe that love, if it was sincere, could survive anything. We met during our junior year at Colorado State University. I was studying literature on a partial scholarship and working 3 jobs to cover what financial aid did not. Julian was in business school, the only son of one of Denver's wealthiest families. Our first real conversation happened during finals week. I had spread my books across 3 library chairs and was surviving on vending machine coffee when he stopped beside my table. "You look like you need food more than another chapter," he said. "The cafeteria closes in 20 minutes, but there's a diner downtown that serves pie all night." "I can't afford diners," I told him. He did not laugh or offer charity with a condescending smile. He simply said, "I didn't ask if you could afford it. I asked if you were hungry." That was Julian. He moved past the surface of a problem and looked directly at the person inside it. We went to the diner. He bought me apple pie and listened while I talked about Victorian novels, the scholarship I was terrified of losing, and my dream of becoming a teacher. He did not interrupt. He listened as if my thoughts mattered. When you have spent much of your life trying not to be a burden, being listened to can feel like being loved before love has even been named. After that night, we became inseparable. Julian brought me into his world of charity dinners and country clubs, but he never asked me to pretend I belonged there. If I felt uncomfortable, he left early with me. In return, I showed him my world. Midnight study sessions, shared pizza in crowded dorm rooms, used bookstores where I could spend hours without buying anything. He made ambition feel less like hunger and more like purpose. I made simplicity feel less like failure and more like freedom. The night he proposed, we were sitting beside the campus lake while the sun disappeared behind the mountains. He took out an emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. His hands were shaking. "It's been waiting for the right woman," he said. "I think it has been waiting for you." I said yes before he finished asking. We planned a small wedding after graduation. We talked about renting an apartment near campus while he completed his MBA. I would teach. He would build a career independent of his family. We imagined children, Sunday breakfasts, bookshelves covering an entire wall. We were 22. We did not understand that some people would rather destroy love than allow it to challenge their control. Julian's parents learned about our engagement within a week. His father, Charles Blackwood, summoned me to the downtown headquarters of Blackwood Industries. I went believing he wanted to discuss the wedding. Instead, I found myself sitting across from a man who had already investigated my family, my scholarship, my grades, and my finances. "You are an intelligent young woman," he said. "So I assume you understand that affection and suitability are not the same thing." I told him Julian and I loved each other. Charles smiled, as though love were a childish argument. He listed everything he believed made me unworthy. My father worked construction. I depended on financial aid. I had no family connections or social influence. Then he explained what would happen if I refused to leave Julian. One call from him could place my scholarship under review. One conversation with the right administrator could end my education. He could make sure no school district hired me after graduation. He also threatened Julian. If Julian gave up his trust fund, Charles would close every professional door he tried to open. He would make certain his own son failed. At 22, I had never encountered that kind of power. It did not need to shout. It simply described the future it could erase. There was one fact Charles did not know. I was pregnant. I had discovered it 3 days earlier, alone in the bathroom of my dorm room, staring at 2 pink lines on a plastic test. I was frightened, but I had imagined Julian's face when I told him. The timing was not what we planned, but I believed we would face it together. Then Charles turned our unborn child into another reason to be afraid. If I stayed with Julian, I could lose my education. Julian could lose every opportunity to support us. Our baby could be born into a war created by a man with more influence than either of us understood. I wish I could tell you that I walked out and told Julian everything. I did not. Fear rarely feels like cowardice while you are inside it. It feels like responsibility. It tells you that silence is sacrifice and that making the decision alone is the mature thing to do. I convinced myself that leaving Julian would protect him and our child. I met him at our favorite coffee shop. He was waiting near the window, smiling when he saw me. "There's my beautiful fiancé," he said. I could not meet his eyes. "We need to talk." His smile disappeared. I told him we were too different. I said I did not want his world, his family, or the life we had planned. Every sentence was a lie built around one truth. I was terrified. Julian reached for my hands. "Then we'll choose another life," he said. "I don't need their money. I need you." For one moment, I almost told him everything. Then I remembered Charles describing how easily he could destroy us. I removed the emerald ring and placed it on the table. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Love isn't always enough." Julian stared at the ring as if I had placed a weapon between us. "It is for us," he said. "It has to be." I walked away while he called my name. 3 weeks later, I lost the baby. The miscarriage began on a rainy Thursday morning. By the time I reached the campus health center, there was nothing anyone could do. The doctor told me early losses were common and that I had done nothing wrong. But grief does not listen to medical explanations. I believed I had destroyed our future for a child I could not save. Julian called. He left messages. He waited outside my classes and visited places he knew I loved. I avoided him because telling him the truth would mean watching him mourn 2 losses at once. Our relationship and the child he never knew existed. Eventually, he stopped coming. Eventually, he graduated. Eventually, the silence between us became 30 years. 6 months after our breakup, Fletcher Morrison proposed. He was 12 years older, professionally established, and familiar to my family. He seemed calm, predictable, and safe. I did not love him. I was tired of grief. I thought safety might be enough. At first, Fletcher's control looked like care. He suggested which clothes were appropriate. He offered to manage the finances. He questioned whether my college friends were good influences. The suggestions became rules. The rules became expectations. The expectations became consequences. Slowly, I stopped seeing friends. I stopped discussing work. I stopped making decisions without consulting him. Control rarely arrives and announces that it intends to imprison you. It begins by making your world smaller while promising to make your life easier. By the time I understood what Fletcher had taken from me, I no longer trusted myself enough to believe I could survive without him. That was why, after the gala, Julian's business card frightened me almost as much as it gave me hope. I sat in my bedroom for 3 nights with the card in one hand and the memory of his emerald ring in the other, wondering whether second chances were real or simply another way for life to remind us of what we had lost. I believed the greatest secret in my marriage was that I had never stopped loving Julian. I was wrong. Fletcher had been keeping a secret of his own, and when he finally revealed it, I understood that our 30 years apart had not been an accident. I did not yet know what Fletcher had done, but the first step toward uncovering it was dialing the number Julian had placed in my hand. For 3 mornings, I carried his business card from room to room as if it might tell me what to do. I placed it beside my coffee, slipped it into my pocket, then hid it beneath a stack of old magazines whenever I heard Fletcher coming. On Thursday, Fletcher left early for a golf meeting with potential investors. I waited until his car disappeared at the end of the street before walking to the kitchen phone. My hands trembled as I dialed. Blackwood Industries, Muster Blackwood's office. The woman who answered sounded polished and efficient. "This is Maureen Morrison," I said. "Muster," Blackwood asked me to call. There was a brief pause. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. He has been expecting you." Those words unsettled me more than they should have. He had been expecting me. Someone had believed I would find the courage to call, even when I had not believed it myself. A moment later, Julian's voice came through the line. "Maureen," he said my name gently, without surprise or accusation. "Thank you for calling." I almost didn't. "I know." "How could you know?" "Because I remember how you disappear when you're afraid." The words were not cruel, but they touched a place in me I had spent years avoiding. "I'm not the same person you remember," I said. "Neither am I." We agreed to meet at a small cafe on 16th Street. It was the kind of place Fletcher would never enter, with mismatched wooden tables, local paintings on the walls, and students working for hours over a single cup of coffee. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the back. Even after leaving my own house, I still searched for the safest shadow. Julian arrived exactly on time. In daylight, he looked less like the powerful executive from the gala and more like the man I had loved. He wore a charcoal coat over a white shirt without a tie. Silver touched his hair, and the years had sharpened his face, but his expression softened the moment he saw me. "You look beautiful," he said. I looked down at my hands. Fletcher had not called me beautiful in years. He called me presentable when I dressed correctly and careless when I did not. A sincere compliment felt almost dangerous because it asked me to accept something good about myself. "You look successful," I replied. Julian sat across from me. Success and happiness are not the same thing. A server brought coffee. Julian ordered his black, just as he had in college. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. 30 years sat between us like another person at the table. Finally, Julian leaned forward. "Why did you leave me?" I had rehearsed answers for days, but the only one that mattered was the truth. "Your father threatened me." Julian went still. I told him about the meeting in Charles Blackwood's office, the scholarship, the threats against his future, and the certainty with which his father described the destruction he could arrange. Then I told him about the pregnancy. His face lost all color. "You were carrying my child?" I nodded. "And you went through that alone?" "I thought I was protecting you." Julian looked away toward the window. For a moment, I could see him trying to control emotions too large for the small cafe. "When did you lose the baby?" 3 weeks after I left. He closed his eyes. I had imagined that confession for decades, but nothing prepared me for the grief on his face. It was fresh to him. While I had carried the loss for 30 years, Julian had received it in a single sentence. "I should have told you," I said. Yes, there was no anger in the word, which made it harder to hear. "You should have trusted me enough to let me choose." I was 22. So was I. I was terrified. So was I. He looked back at me, his eyes bright. But I would have stood beside you. I know that now. That was the truth I had spent most of my life trying not to face. I had made a decision for both of us because fear convinced me that love was a weakness someone else could exploit. I reached across the table. "I'm sorry." Julian turned his hand beneath mine and held it. "My father died 5 years ago," he said. "I spent most of my adult life trying to prove I could build something without him. I thought if I became successful enough, I would finally understand why you left. Did you?" "No. I understood less every year. He told me he had searched for me almost from the beginning. He hired private investigators, contacted former classmates, and followed records that led nowhere. I never believed you stopped loving me," he said. "I thought something had happened, but every time I got close, the trail disappeared." My heart tightened. "Why didn't you find me through the marriage records?" I tried. "There were errors, false addresses, and reports saying you had moved overseas. One investigator claimed you did not want contact. Another said you had changed your name again." I stared at him. "Those were not ordinary mistakes. They were patterns," Julian continued. "I married someone eventually. Catherine and I both knew it was more arrangement than love. We divorced 3 years ago. No children, no bitterness, just 2 people admitting we had built a life for the wrong reasons. Then he told me something that made the gala feel less like coincidence. His investigators had located my marriage record 1 month earlier. He had known I was in Denver. He was planning to approach me carefully, away from Fletcher and the public eye. When I walked into that ballroom and saw you standing behind those plants, he said, I forgot every careful plan I had made. What happens now? I asked. That depends on what you want. No one had asked me that question in years. Not what was practical. Not what would preserve appearances. Not what would keep Fletcher calm. What did I want? I don't know anymore. Then you need space to find out. Julian offered me a position at Blackwood Industries developing partnerships with schools and literacy programs. He remembered that I had once wanted to teach and believed my background could be useful. It would be real work, he said. Not a favor. You would have your own salary and your own authority. The idea frightened me. Fletcher had spent years suggesting I was incapable of handling the world without him. Part of me had begun to believe that I had forgotten how. I need time. Take it. Julian wrote his private number on the back of another card. Whatever you decide, don't disappear again. I won't. When I returned home, Fletcher was waiting in the kitchen. Where have you been? Out for coffee. For 3 hours? I lost track of time. With him? I did not answer quickly enough. Fletcher stepped closer. You met Julian Blackwood. It was not a question. He gripped my arm. The pressure was sharp, but what frightened me most was not the pain. It was the satisfaction that passed over his face when I flinched. Let go of me, he laughed. Or what? You'll call your billionaire boyfriend? Let go. Something in my voice changed. Fletcher released me with a shove that made me catch the edge of the counter. You are 57 years old, he said. You're acting like a teenager with her first crush. What's pathetic is a man who has to frighten his wife to feel powerful. The words seemed to surprise both of us. For 25 years, I had softened every truth before giving it to Fletcher. That afternoon, I stopped. His face hardened. You think Julian is some heroic man who never gave up on you? I know he searched for me, Fletcher smiled. I know. The room became strangely quiet. What do you mean? I knew about the investigators. The first one contacted a business associate of mine 6 months after we married. You knew Julian was looking for me? Of course. And you never told me. Why would I? So you could abandon your marriage for some college fantasy? My legs weakened. Fletcher poured himself a drink, as casually as if he were explaining an ordinary business decision. He admitted that he had paid people to provide false addresses and misleading information. He used contacts to make records difficult to trace. He allowed investigators to believe I wanted no contact. Each sentence removed another piece of the life I thought I understood. You stole 30 years from us. I protected what was mine. What was yours? Our marriage. No, I said. You protected your control. Fletcher's expression sharpened. I gave you everything. You gave me what you wanted me to have. A house, security, a respectable life. and permission to exist only when it suited you. He told me Julian loved a memory, not the woman I had become. He said a man like Julian would grow tired of an aging housewife who had accomplished nothing. Those words would once have destroyed me. Instead, I heard the fear beneath them. Fletcher was not describing my worth. He was describing the belief he needed me to accept so I would never leave. "I don't care if Julian changes his mind tomorrow," I said. Fletcher stared at me. "This is not about choosing him over you. It's about choosing myself instead of this. You won't survive without me. I would rather learn how to survive alone than spend another day being owned." He threatened lawyers, frozen accounts, and years of court battles. He said I would receive nothing and would eventually return, frightened and broke. For the first time, I understood that I did not need proof that my next life would be perfect before I was allowed to leave a life that was destroying me. I went upstairs and packed one suitcase. At the door, Fletcher called after me. "You'll come crawling back." I turned and looked at the man I had once mistaken for safety. "No, Fletcher. Whatever happens next, I won't be back." I drove to a hotel downtown and called Julian from the parking lot. He answered on the first ring. "Maureen, are you all right?" I left him. There was a brief silence. Then Julian asked the question Fletcher never had. "Are you safe?" I looked at the marks forming on my arm and realized freedom was not the end of the danger. It was the moment Fletcher became most afraid of losing control. Julian's question followed me long after I answered it, because leaving Fletcher had taken me out of the house, but it had not yet taught me how to feel safe inside my own life. "I'm at the Marriott downtown," I told him. I didn't know where else to go. "Stay there. I'm coming." He arrived 20 minutes later wearing jeans and a gray sweater instead of the dark suit I had seen at the gala. Without the executives and polished ballroom around him, he looked more like the young man I remembered, though the concern in his face belonged to someone who had spent 30 years learning how much could be lost. He sat beside me in the hotel lobby and immediately noticed the marks forming on my arm. "Did Fletcher do that?" I pulled my sleeve down. "It's nothing." Julian looked at me quietly. That was when I realized how often I had used those two words to make pain easier for other people to ignore. It's nothing. The insult was nothing. The threat was nothing. The hand around my arm was nothing. The fear that followed me from room to room was nothing. When a person has been controlled for long enough, minimizing the damage becomes part of surviving it. "No," Julian said gently. "It isn't nothing." He did not reach for me until I nodded. Then he touched the bruised skin carefully, as if my body belonged to me, and he needed permission to come near it. That small act of restraint affected me more deeply than any grand declaration at the gala. Fletcher had spent years making decisions for me while insisting it was love. Julian asked before touching an injury. One man treated access to me as his right. The other treated my consent as something sacred. "Tell me what you need," Julian said. The old answer rose automatically. I don't know. For 25 years, my needs had been adjusted around Fletcher's moods, finances, schedule, and reputation. Wanting something for myself felt irresponsible, but I had left the house. If I continued giving other people every answer, I would only be changing who controlled my life. "I need work," I said. "Real work. Not money handed to me because you feel sorry for me," Julian nodded. "Then let's talk about the position." The following morning, I walked into Blackwood Industries as the new director of community relations. The title frightened me. I had not worked in a professional office for decades. My degree in literature had become an old document in a drawer, evidence of the woman I might have been. Fletcher often reminded me that the world had moved on while I stayed home. Part of me believed everyone at Blackwood Industries would recognize that I did not belong. Instead, Julian's assistant, Rebecca, welcomed me with a folder, a schedule, and a tour of the building. She introduced me to department leaders without explaining my history with Julian. "This is Maureen Morrison," she said. "She'll be leading our school partnerships and literacy initiatives." Leading. The word felt too large. My first meeting included representatives from local schools, nonprofit organizations, and several company executives. They discussed grants for classroom libraries and reading programs in underserved communities. For the first 15 minutes, I remained silent. Not because I had nothing to say, because silence had become the posture I trusted most. Then one of the principals described a program that provided books but failed to involve parents. I remembered the families I had worked with during my student teaching years. I remembered how embarrassed some parents felt when they struggled to read in front of their children. The program should include adult literacy support, I said. The room became quiet. My first reaction was panic. I expected correction. Instead, the principal leaned forward. That's exactly what we're missing. The others began asking questions. I answered them. No one laughed. No one told me I was speaking too much. No one glanced toward Julian to see whether my opinion was permitted. By the end of the meeting, I had outlined a pilot program that paired children's reading nights with confidential resources for parents. When the room emptied, I remained in my chair, staring at the notes in front of me. Julian stood in the doorway. How did it feel? Terrifying, he smiled. You were excellent. I had one idea. You had the idea everyone needed. That was the first day I understood how much of myself had survived beneath the silence. Fletcher had not erased my intelligence. He had only convinced me not to use it. The salary Julian offered was more money than I had ever earned. $2,500 a week, plus benefits, vacation time, and authority over my department's budget. I read the employment agreement twice. You don't have to pay me this much. I'm paying you what the position is worth. I haven't worked in years. You have managed a household, coordinated events, maintained relationships, and spent decades reading people who were not always honest with you. Experience does not disappear because no company issued a paycheck for it. His words forced me to reconsider the story I had accepted about myself. Fletcher called me dependent because he controlled the money. He called me inexperienced because he discouraged me from working. He created the condition and then used it as proof of my weakness. That pattern is not uncommon in controlling relationships. A person removes your choices, then points to your lack of choices as evidence that you cannot function alone. I opened a bank account in my own name. The act took less than an hour. Emotionally, it felt like crossing a border. A week later, I bought a cup of coffee without calculating how I would explain the purchase. I chose a blouse without imagining Fletcher's criticism. I drove to work using a temporary rental car and realized no one was tracking how long the trip took. Freedom did not arrive as music, fireworks, or a dramatic speech. It arrived through ordinary decisions no one questioned. Julian and I spent time together, but we moved carefully. I was grateful for that. He did not treat our history as permission to rush our future. We spoke about the child we lost, the marriages we had entered for the wrong reasons, and the people we had become during 30 years apart. Julian admitted that he still carried anger toward his father. I built my company because I wanted to prove he couldn't control me, he said one evening. But if every decision was still a response to him, then maybe he controlled more of my life than I wanted to admit, I understood. Leaving Fletcher did not instantly remove him from my mind. I still heard his voice when I made mistakes. I still apologized before expressing an opinion. I still feared that independence would be taken away if I enjoyed it too openly. Healing was not forgetting the person who controlled me. It was learning to recognize when his voice was speaking through my own fear. 3 days into my new job, Julian called me into his office. A stack of legal documents rested on his desk. Fletcher has filed against both of us, he said. His attorneys accused Julian of interfering in our marriage and requested that certain shared assets remain restricted while the divorce proceeded. Fletcher also claimed that I had abandoned the marriage without justification. The language was formal, but I recognized the intention. He wanted to frighten me. He wanted me to imagine years of court hearings, legal fees, frozen accounts, and public humiliation. He wanted the future to seem so exhausting that returning to him would feel easier. For several minutes, the hotel room, the new job, and the independent bank account all seemed fragile. What if he can take everything? I asked. Julian sat across from me rather than behind his desk. Then we respond through the legal process. Carefully, lawfully. And with documentation, we met with attorneys who explained that threats were not the same as outcomes. They advised me to preserve financial records, photographs of the bruising, written communications, and any evidence related to Fletcher's control of our accounts. For the first time, I saw documentation not as betrayal, but as protection. Truth needed more than memory. It needed a record. During their review of Fletcher's companies, Julian's legal and financial teams discovered inconsistencies that had nothing to do with our divorce. Projects were funded through companies with unclear ownership. Large sums moved between accounts without obvious business reasons. Some real estate developments appeared to receive far more money than their legitimate value could explain. Julian had noticed irregularities while evaluating Morrison Industries before the acquisition. Now the pattern looked more serious. "I need to be careful about how I say this," he told me. "Our lawyers believe federal investigators may already be examining some of these transactions." I stared at the reports. For years, Fletcher had presented himself as the responsible provider and me as the incapable dependent. Yet the lifestyle he used to prove his superiority might have been built on financial deception. The marble house, the expensive dinners, the gold watch, the lectures about responsibility. All of it suddenly looked different. "Did you start this investigation because of me?" I asked. No. Questions about his finances existed before the gala. The legal fight simply gave our team a reason to review the records more closely. That distinction mattered. I did not want justice to become revenge. I did not want Julian using his power to destroy Fletcher because Fletcher had hurt me. I wanted whatever happened next to be based on evidence and handled by the proper authorities. For so long, Fletcher had decided that rules applied differently to powerful men. I did not want freedom if it required becoming like him. Julian warned me that if an investigation became public, reporters might examine our marriage, my relationship with him, and the scene at the gala. Once, the thought of public attention would have sent me running back into the shadows. But I had already spent 25 years protecting Fletcher's image while losing my own identity. "I'm not going to lie for him," I said. The next morning, I arrived at Blackwood Industries and saw several news vans parked across the street. Cameras faced the entrance. Reporters stood beneath the gray Denver sky, checking their phones and waiting for something none of us had yet been told. For 25 years, I had believed Fletcher could destroy my life whenever he chose. As I watched the reporters gather, I began to understand the truth. Fletcher had not been protecting a successful life. He had been protecting a structure of secrets. And that structure was beginning to collapse under its own weight. By the end of that morning, the collapse was no longer something I could sense from a distance. It had a date, a warrant, and Fletcher's name on it. 2 weeks later, federal agents entered Morrison Development shortly after 9 in the morning. I did not see the arrest in person. I watched it from a television in Julian's office, surrounded by people who had gone unusually quiet. Fletcher emerged from the building between two agents, his wrists secured in front of him. Reporters shouted questions about money laundering, tax evasion, and fraudulent real estate transactions. Camera flashes reflected against the glass doors behind him. For 25 years, I had watched Fletcher enter rooms as though everyone inside owed him respect. He straightened his shoulders, displayed his father's gold watch, and spoke with the confidence of a man who believed appearances could become truth if he defended them loudly enough. That morning, he looked small. Not because he was in handcuffs, because there was no one left for him to control. The agents did not care about his family name, his house, his business connections, or the expensive suit he was wearing. They cared about records, transactions, and evidence. I had once believed powerful men could arrange reality to suit themselves. Charles Blackwood had taught me that fear when I was 22. Fletcher had reinforced it throughout our marriage. Watching Fletcher face a lawful investigation did not erase what either man had done, but it reminded me that influence was not the same as immunity. Julian stood beside me without speaking. When the television showed Fletcher being placed inside a government vehicle, Julian asked, "How do you feel?" I expected anger. I expected satisfaction. Perhaps part of me even expected joy. Instead, I felt an enormous stillness inside my chest, as if I had been holding my breath for 25 years and had only just remembered how to release it. "Free," I said. It was the first word that felt large enough. The federal case did not magically solve every problem. The divorce still required attorneys, hearings, financial disclosures, and patience. Some assets were frozen while investigators determined where the money had come from. Reporters examined Fletcher's business dealings and briefly turned their attention toward our marriage. For several days, my photograph appeared beside headlines written by people who knew nothing about my life. Once, that kind of public scrutiny would have terrified me. Fletcher had trained me to believe embarrassment was one of the worst things that could happen to a person. I no longer believed that. The truth can be uncomfortable. It can be complicated in public. But shame belongs to the person who creates the harm, not to the person who finally stops hiding it. I cooperated through my attorney and answered only what was necessary. I did not exaggerate Fletcher's behavior. I did not minimize it either. That balance mattered to me. Freedom did not mean using Julian's influence to punish Fletcher. It meant allowing lawful consequences to follow documented choices. Revenge would have kept Fletcher at the center of my life. Accountability allowed me to move forward without becoming like him. The legal claims he had filed against Julian and me lost much of their force as his business records came under federal review. His attorneys focused on the criminal case, and the divorce negotiations became less about threatening me and more about identifying legitimate assets. For the first time, Fletcher could not use confusion as a weapon. Everything had to be recorded. Everything had to be explained. Everything had to withstand questions from people he could not intimidate. I returned to work. That may sound ordinary after an arrest and a public scandal, but ordinary life became one of the greatest gifts I received. I built the literacy program we had discussed during my first meeting. We partnered with public schools, community centers, and local libraries. Parents who had hidden their reading struggles for years began attending evening classes while their children participated in storytelling workshops nearby. At one event, a mother approached me after reading an entire page aloud for the first time. "I always thought I was too old to learn," she said. I understood her more deeply than she knew. "No," I told her. "Sometimes we are simply learning at the first moment we finally feel safe enough to try." The same was true for me. At 57, I learned how to lead meetings, negotiate budgets, sign my own lease, and choose furniture for an apartment no one else controlled. I learned that making a mistake did not mean I was incapable. I learned that disagreement did not always lead to punishment. Most importantly, I learned that independence and love were not enemies. Julian never asked me to move into his home. He never suggested that I leave my job or allow him to manage my finances. When he offered help, he waited for my answer. We spent the next several months getting to know each other again. The young people we had been were still inside us, but they were not the whole story. Julian had become more guarded. I had become cautious in ways that sometimes looked like distance. He carried guilt over not protecting me from his father, even though he had never known about the threats. I carried guilt over making our decision alone. We talked about the child we lost. Not every conversation ended with comfort. Some ended in tears. Others ended in silence. But silence with Julian felt different. It was not punishment. It was space. One evening, we returned to the campus lake where he had proposed more than 30 years earlier. The mountains were dark against the fading sky, and the water reflected the last light of the day. Julian reached into his coat pocket. When he opened his hand, his grandmother's emerald ring rested in his palm. After our breakup, he had kept it for years. When he finally believed he might never find me, he placed it in a safe with the letters and photographs he could not bring himself to destroy. "I thought this ring represented the life we lost," he said. "Now I think it represents the choice we were never allowed to make." He did not kneel immediately. Instead, he looked at me and asked, "Do you want me to ask?" That question told me more about the man he had become than any romantic speech could have. "Yes," I said, "but ask the woman standing here now. Not the girl you remember," Julian smiled. "She is the woman I love." 8 months after the gala, we were married at the Four Seasons in Denver. My first wedding to Fletcher had been large, expensive, and designed to prove that I had entered a respectable life. I remembered very little of it except the pressure to make everything appear perfect. My wedding to Julian was smaller. I wore a simple ivory dress. The emerald ring rested on my hand. Outside the windows, the Colorado mountains stood beneath a clear morning sky. I did not marry Julian because I needed financial security. I had my own income, my own home, and work that gave my life meaning. I did not marry him because he had rescued me. Julian finding me at the gala had opened a door, but I had still been the one required to walk through it. I married him because I was finally free enough to choose him. At 22, I believed love meant never being separated. At 58, I understood that love also meant honesty, respect, patience, and the freedom to remain fully yourself beside another person. After the ceremony, Julian and I stood near the windows overlooking the mountains. "Do you ever think about how different everything might have been?" I asked. "Every day," he said. "But I don't want to spend what we have left mourning the years we cannot change." I looked down at the emerald ring. For a long time, I had believed my story was about a love stolen from me. Now I understood it differently. It was about a woman who had been taught to disappear and who finally allowed herself to be seen. Julian's return did not create my worth. Fletcher's arrest did not restore it. The job, the apartment, and the wedding did not give it to me. My worth had survived every year I failed to recognize it. Perhaps you are listening from inside a life that looks successful to everyone else but feels smaller every day. Perhaps someone has convinced you that you are too old, too dependent, too inexperienced, or too damaged to begin again. I believed all of those things. I was wrong. 58 was not too late for me. It was the first age at which I truly understood the difference between being protected and being controlled, between being kept and being loved, between surviving a life and choosing one. Julian had searched for me for 30 years, but the truth is, I had been searching for myself for even longer. And when I finally found that woman, I promised I would never ask her to stand in the shadows again. Have you ever had to choose yourself after years of putting everyone else first? Share your story in the comments and subscribe to When Family Breaks One as we continue exploring broken families, hidden truths, and the courage it takes to begin again. Kate Thuk. In the end, this was never only a story about a billionaire finding the woman he had loved 30 years earlier. It was about what can happen when fear makes our choices for us, when control disguises itself as protection, and when a person spends so many years keeping the peace that she forgets she is allowed to have a voice. For a long time, Maureen believed the most important question was whether Julian still loved her. But the deeper question was whether she could learn to value herself again. Julian's return opened a door, but he could not walk through it for her. She still had to leave the marriage, face uncertainty, rebuild her confidence, earn her own money, and accept that freedom might feel frightening before it felt peaceful. That is the most important lesson in this story. Being loved by someone else cannot replace the decision to stop abandoning yourself. Control does not always begin with obvious cruelty. It can begin with someone choosing your clothes, managing all the money, criticizing your friends, or telling you that you are incapable of surviving alone. Each act may appear small, but over time, those small acts can teach a person to distrust her own judgment. In real life, the first step is not always a dramatic escape. Sometimes it is simply paying attention. Notice whether you are constantly afraid of disappointing someone. Ask yourself whether your opinions are respected, whether you have access to financial information, and whether you are free to maintain friendships, work, and make reasonable decisions. The next step is to rebuild support carefully. Speak with someone trustworthy. Preserve important documents. Learn about your financial situation. Seek qualified legal or professional guidance when necessary. Most importantly, do not make major decisions based only on fear, shame, or pressure. A healthy relationship should not require you to become smaller, so another person can feel powerful. Maureen also reminds us that beginning again does not belong only to the young. There is no age at which dignity, meaningful work, honest love, or personal freedom stops mattering. The years already lost cannot be returned, but the years ahead do not have to be surrendered with them. Julian searched for Maureen for 30 years, but Maureen's greatest discovery was not that he still loved her. It was that the woman she had buried beneath silence and fear was still alive. Here is a simple question for you. Do you believe it is ever too late to begin again? Please share your answer in the comments so everyone can read and learn from different points of view. And please subscribe to When Family Breaks One to support the channel and help us continue creating meaningful stories about family, hidden truths, healing, and second chances.